I want you to picture something with me for a second. Picture yourself flat on your back in a hospital bed, coming out of anesthesia with that weird cotton mouth feeling and the lights just a little too bright. You're not scared because the procedure went fine. The doctor already told you so. You're just tired and groggy, and you're thinking about your own bed at home, your own pillow, and maybe a cup of tea. Now picture this. Your phone buzzes. It's your neighbor Carol, and she says, real casual, like she's talking about the weather, "Hey, hon, I picked up one of your quilts at the yard sale this morning, the log cabin pattern one. I hope that's okay." And the whole world just stops. Because I didn't have a yard sale. I didn't know anything about a yard sale. And that log cabin quilt was not just a blanket. That log cabin quilt had been hand-stitched by my late husband Earl before the arthritis took his hands. And inside its border, sewn into the lining where nobody would ever think to look, was a letter he'd written to me that I hadn't read in 11 years. That was the morning my heart just about stopped for the second time in a week. And that was the morning I learned that quiet people, when they finally decide to move, they move with purpose. My name is Dorothy Mae Calloway. I am 72 years old. And this is the story of how a yard sale changed everything.
I live in a small town called Harlan's Creek, Tennessee. Population just under 4,000, not counting the deer. We've got one stoplight, a Dollar General, a Baptist church, and a diner called Millie's, where the coffee is terrible, and I go every Tuesday morning anyway, because Millie has known me since I was 30, and some things you just don't give up. I've lived in the same house on Maple Crest Road for 43 years. Earl and I bought it in 1981 for $62,000 and spent about 30 of those years fixing something or another that was always on the verge of falling apart. Good bones, Earl always said. House has good bones. That was his way of saying he loved it too much to give it up. Earl passed 11 years ago. Heart failure. 69 years old. Too young. I still think that every single day. We were married 44 years, and I will tell you plain, losing a partner you've had for 44 years is like losing a limb you didn't know was holding you up until it was gone. You spend the first year just learning how to walk again. But I am not a woman who falls apart. Never have been. My mama raised me in the mountains of East Tennessee, and she didn't have time for women who went to pieces when life got hard. You grieve, and you get up, and you keep going. I kept going. I kept the house, I kept the garden, I kept my quilting. Lord, I kept my quilting. I have been quilting since I was 11 years old. My grandmother Pearl taught me on her back porch in Jellicoe. A hand-pieced log cabin pattern, same one I've made probably 30 times since. I've made quilts for every grandchild and great-niece and neighbor baby that ever came through this county. I've donated quilts to church auctions, I've draped them over sick friends' beds, I've given them as wedding gifts and graduation gifts, and once, memorably, as a very pointed birthday gift to my sister Norma, who had said publicly that she didn't understand why people wasted time on quilts when you could just buy a blanket at Walmart. Norma has never said that again. To me, a quilt is not a blanket. A quilt is a record. It is hours and intention and memory all stitched together. Every quilt I have made tells a story, if you know how to read it. And the quilts Earl made, those few precious ones, told stories I wasn't sure the rest of the family was ready to hear. Now, let me tell you about my grandson, Tyler. Tyler is 28. He's a good-hearted boy in the way that a lot of young men are good-hearted, meaning he means well, he loves his grandmother, and he occasionally does things without thinking them through that leave a trail of wreckage behind him. He married a girl named Kayla 2 years ago, and I like Kayla fine. She's efficient, organized, the kind of person who uses a label maker on her pantry and has a system for everything, which I honestly admire even when it gets her into trouble. 3 weeks ago, I had a routine procedure on my gallbladder. Nothing dramatic. Day surgery, in and out. Doctor said I'd be back on my feet in a week. I stayed with my daughter Patricia for the recovery because Patricia lives in Knoxville and her guest room has a nice firm mattress and she makes good soup. While I was gone, 5 days total, Tyler and Kayla decided to help. Now, they'd been on me for 2 years about cleaning out the house. You hear this a lot when you're a widow of a certain age. Your family gets this look, loving, concerned, a little bit impatient, and they start talking about downsizing and simplifying, and maybe you don't need all this stuff, Grandma. They mean well. I know they mean well, but there is a difference between meaning well and doing right, and that gap is where this whole story lives. Tyler has a key to my house. I gave it to him 2 years ago for emergencies, which apparently he had decided now included yard sales. He and Kayla came in, God bless them, with the best intentions in the world. They cleared out the storage room. They took boxes of old dishes, some of Earl's tools that had been sitting untouched, a few pieces of furniture I'd been meaning to donate. All of that, fine. I might have been annoyed about the not asking, but I could have let most of it go. But then they went into the linen closet. And then they went into the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. And they sold 11 quilts. 11! I had to sit down on Patricia's couch when Carol called and count them on my fingers. 11 quilts. Some of them mine, some of them my grandmother Pearl's, and 3 of them, 3, were Earl's. Tyler was proud of himself when he called to tell me. We raised almost $400, Grandma. Sold everything by 10 o'clock. He sounded so pleased, like he'd done me the biggest.
Patricia drove me home the next morning. She kept asking what was wrong, and I kept saying, I'll explain when I know more, which is the truth, but also, I'll be honest, I needed the drive to think. You have to understand something about Earl. Earl Calloway was a quiet, methodical man who spent 30 years as a land surveyor for the county. He measured things for a living. Distances, borders, property lines. He was precise, the way a watchmaker is precise. He kept records, he kept notes. He had a system for everything. And he had a deep, abiding distrust of banks. Not a crazy distrust, not the tinfoil hat kind. The old-fashioned East Tennessee kind, born from a grandfather who lost his savings in 1933 and never forgot it. Earl kept our household accounts in a bank, of course, but things he considered truly important, documents, records, anything that really mattered, Earl kept those close to home. The quilts were his idea, not the quilting. That was mine. But early in our marriage, maybe 1985, he came to me with something he'd read in a history book about how enslaved people had used quilts to pass along information and maps along the Underground Railroad. He got this look on his face that I recognized, the quiet, thoughtful look that meant he was chewing on an idea. Dorothy, he said, would you ever be able to hide something in a quilt, inside the lining, so it couldn't be seen from outside? I told him, yes, if you were careful about it. He said, good. Over the years, he brought me things to tuck away. Not often, maybe once every few years. A letter, a folded document. I didn't always know what was in them. He'd give me a sealed envelope and I'd stitch it into the lining of whatever quilt I was working on at the time. We had a little code between us. He kept a handwritten list in his desk drawer, not of what was inside, just of which quilt held what number. And the number corresponded to a separate private record only he and I knew about. After he died, I went through his desk. I found the list. I kept it. And then, and I cannot tell you exactly why, except that grief makes you do things you can't fully explain, I never looked at it again. I put it in my Bible, between the pages of Ruth and 1 Samuel, and I went about the business of living without him. I had forgotten for 11 years what was sleeping in those quilts. And now somebody had bought them for $20 at a yard sale in Harlan's Creek, Tennessee, and I had no idea who. first thing I did when I got home, before I unpacked my bag, before I made tea, I went to my Bible. The list was still there. Earl's handwriting, careful and small, on a piece of graph paper he'd torn out of a surveying notebook. 7 quilts listed. 7! Next to each one was a description. The pattern name, the primary colors, the approximate year I'd made it. And next to each description was a code, a letter and a number. A1, B3, C2, like that. He had a separate notebook, a small brown one I'd always thought was for surveying notes, that matched up the codes. I found it in the back of the same drawer, tucked under a road atlas. I sat down at the kitchen table and matched them up. A1, the double wedding ring quilt, blue and white, made 1987. Contains marriage certificate, original. Deed to Maple Crest property, original. Earl's handwritten family tree going back to 1840. B3, the log cabin quilt, dark green and cream, made 1991. Contains personal letter, sealed, from Earl to Dorothy, not to be opened until after his death. C2, the Lone Star quilt, burgundy and gold, made 1994. Contains copy of Papa's oral land claim record, handwritten statement from Earl regarding disputed acreage on the Calloway family property. There were 4 more. 2 of them I quickly identified. They were still in the house. Tyler and Kayla had missed them because they were on actual beds, not in the cedar chest. That left 5 quilts sold. And of those 5, 3 contained something Earl had put there, including the one with the land claim documents. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. When I first read those words, disputed acreage on the Calloway family property, I didn't fully understand what I was looking at. Earl had mentioned over the years that his family's land up in Claiborne County had some old title issues, something that went back to his father's generation. I'd always understood it was unresolved. I didn't know he'd been documenting it. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time with those 2 pieces of paper in front of me, and I thought about my husband, this quiet, careful, methodical man who had spent 30 years measuring land for a living, and who had apparently spent those same 30 years quietly building a case about something he never fully explained. I called Tyler that afternoon. I want to be clear about something. I did not call him angry. I called him with a list of questions and a specific tone of voice that my children have understood since they were small to mean business without drama. Tyler, I need to know everything about that yard sale. Who bought what? Do you remember? Long pause. Grandma, we didn't really keep track. Tyler Allen Calloway, I need you to think very hard. Another pause. Then, Kayla took some pictures for her Instagram, like of the setup. She might have some photos. Get me those photos. Kayla's photos, God bless her and her label maker, were actually useful. She documented the whole setup with the organized precision of someone who does things right even when they're doing the wrong thing. There were 11 quilts visible across various tables and chairs, and in the background of several shots, you could see people examining them. I studied those photos on my phone for an hour with my reading glasses and a cup of tea, and I wrote down everything I could identify. The blue and white double wedding ring quilt, the one with the marriage certificate and the original deed, I could see it draped over the back of a folding chair in one photo. In the next photo, it was gone. The burgundy Lone Star quilt, Earl's land papers, was laid out flat on a card table. In the background, I could see a woman's hand touching it. I zoomed in on that hand. Bright pink nail polish, a silver bracelet with a charm on it. I called Tyler back. Did you notice a woman at the sale, maybe Orly, pink nail polish, silver charm bracelet? Silence. Then Kayla's voice in the background. Tyler had put me on speaker, bless his heart, saying, "Oh, that was probably Janet. Janet from my work. She texted me asking if we had any quilts for sale before we even started." Kayla's coworker Janet had specifically asked about quilts before the sale. I said, "Kayla, I need Janet's number."
There was a pause, and then Kayla said something that I will remember for a long time. Mrs. Calloway, I'm starting to feel like maybe those quilts weren't just old blankets. No, honey, I said. They were not. She gave me Janet's number without another word.
I called Janet that same evening. Janet Moreau is a perfectly nice woman in her late 30s who works with Kayla at an insurance office in Knoxville and collects, as she told me enthusiastically on the phone, vintage textiles. She'd been buying old quilts at estate sales for years. She knew the real thing when she saw it. Mrs. Calloway, I am so embarrassed, she said, the moment I explained the situation. I had no idea. I paid $30 for the blue and white one. I could see it was hand-stitched and old, and honestly, I thought it was a steal, but I wasn't trying to take advantage of anybody. I know you weren't, I said. I'm not upset with you, Janet. I just need it back. Of course, absolutely. Do you want to come get it, or should I bring it? I'll come to you. Tomorrow, if that's all right. Patricia drove me to Knoxville the next morning. Janet met us at her door with the double wedding ring quilt already folded, and the most apologetic expression I'd seen in years. She'd put it in a pillowcase to protect it, which told me she really did respect old quilts. I thanked her. I told her the story, the short version, and by the end of it, she had tears in her eyes. Does this kind of thing just happen to you? She said. I laughed. It came out more tired than I meant it to. Seems like. In the car on the way home, Patricia at the wheel, I carefully felt along the inner seam. There it was, still there. The thickness of folded paper, still sealed inside 30 years of quilting. I did not open it in the car. I waited until I was home, at my own kitchen table, with tea and the kind of quiet you need for certain moments. Inside, our original marriage certificate, dated June 12, 1969, signed by the Justice of the Peace in Harlan's Creek. A photocopy of the original deed to Maplecrest Road. An Earl's family tree. 5 pages of careful handwriting going back to 1840, tracing the Calloway line through Claiborne County, Tennessee, noting births and deaths and land holdings, and one notation at the bottom of the last page, circled twice, that read, Horace Calloway, 40 acres, Cedar Fork Road, transferred under duress 1948, no value. That evening, Tyler and Kayla drove out from Knoxville. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd spread out Earl's list, where I'd read his letter, where I'd matched up his codes. And they looked like two people who were beginning to understand the weight of what they'd done. Tyler, to his credit, did not make excuses. He sat with his hands folded and his jaw tight, and he said, Grandma, I am sorry. I should have asked you. I should have called. I had no business going through your things. I looked at my grandson. This boy I had rocked when he had colic. This boy I had taken to every single one of his Little League games for 3 years, even though I do not understand or enjoy baseball. Tyler, I said, you are forgiven. That is not in question. But I need your help. Kayla pulled out her phone. She had apparently spent the day making calls. She'd identified the people who bought 3 of the remaining quilts. 2 were church ladies from town who returned them without a moment's hesitation. God bless the church ladies of Harlan's Creek. And 1 had gone to a woman who drove up from Chattanooga and left before Kayla got her name. The burgundy Lone Star quilt had been sold to a man Kayla had never seen before. She thought he might have been browsing from the road. Older man, gray truck. He'd paid $25 in cash. Did you see the truck? Did you get a plate? Grandma, it was a yard sale. I know. It's all right. It wasn't all right. But I have learned in 72 years that there were moments when saying a thing won't help anything. And this was one of them. I needed to think. I needed to look at this from Earl's direction. I slept on it. Literally, I went to bed that night and I lay in the dark and I thought about Earl. And I thought about his family, and I thought about everything I knew and didn't know. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, something clicked. Darren. Earl's brother's son, Darren, had been asking about the Claiborne County property for 3 years.
He'd mentioned it at a family reunion, mentioned it again at Earl's youngest brother's funeral, mentioned it a third time in a phone call last Thanksgiving that I'd mostly put down to him making conversation. You know anything about that old Cedar Fork property, Aunt Dorothy? Earl ever say anything about that? I said I didn't know much, which was true at the time. But now I was thinking about a gray truck. Now, I am not the kind of woman who accuses people without evidence. Earl raised me to that. Or I raised myself to it, more accurately. And I wasn't about to call my nephew and say, "Did you buy a quilt at my yard sale?" without having something more than a hunch. So I called Earl's younger brother, Raymond. 81 years old, sharp as a tack, living in Morristown. Raymond and I have always gotten along. He has the kind of directness that old men earn after a certain point. "Raymond," I said, "does Darren drive a gray truck?" Raymond said, "He's had the same gray F-150 for 6 years. Why?" I told him why. There was a very long pause. Then Raymond said, "Dorothy, you know what was in that quilt?" I'm beginning to. Another pause. Then, "Only talked to me about that land before he died. He said he had documentation. He said he'd put it somewhere safe. I didn't know where. I didn't know it was in a quilt." "What do you know about the land, Raymond? Tell me all of it." And Raymond told me a story I had never heard. A story that had been sitting in the Calloway family for 75 years, waiting for someone to pick it up. In 1948, Earl and Raymond's grandfather, Horace Calloway, owned 80 acres up in Claiborne County. Good land. Not rich land, but solid Tennessee hill country that had been in the family since before the Civil War. Horace had a deal fall through on a timber contract, ran short on cash, and a man named Cecil Greer, who ran a small lending operation out of a hardware store in Tazewell, offered him what appeared to be a short-term loan against the property. The paperwork, according to Raymond, was not what Horace thought it was. By the time Horace understood what he'd signed, 40 of those 80 acres had been transferred. No proper deed of sale, no fair market consideration. A legal maneuver that was not uncommon in rural Tennessee in 1948, when men like Horace Calloway didn't always have lawyers, and men like Cecil Greer often did. Horace spent the rest of his life saying he'd been cheated. His children believed him. His grandchildren, Earl and Raymond, believed him too. But believing something and proving it are two different things. Earl spent years on it, Raymond said. He pulled the old county records, the original deed abstracts, found testimony from 2 witnesses who were still alive in the 1980s. He had one of them put it in writing before she passed. He talked to a property attorney in Knoxville in 2006 who told him the claim might have some merit. Not a slam dunk, but something. And the Greer land, what happened to it? Cecil Greer's grandson still has it, lives on it, has a hunting cabin on it. And Darren has been in a property dispute with him for about 18 months because the fence line cuts across what Darren claims is still Calloway land. I sat down. "Raymond," I said slowly, "if Darren knew about Earl's documentation, and if Darren knew I had it, he might have wanted to find it before you knew what you had," Raymond said. Quiet. Just the facts. I wasn't angry. I was something colder and cleaner than angry. I was decided. I called Darren directly. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting for it. "Aunt Dorothy," his voice was careful. Not guilty careful, more like walking on ice careful. "Darren, did you come to my yard sale last Saturday?" A long beat. "I heard about it from a friend, and I happened to be in the area, and I..." "Did you buy a burgundy quilt with a Lone Star pattern?" Silence. "Darren, I am 72 years old. I have known you since you were 4. I am not angry with you, but I need you to tell me the truth right now." He let out a long breath. "Yes, I bought it. I didn't steal it, Aunt Dorothy. I paid for it fair." "I know you paid for it. That's not my point. My point is, do you know what's inside it?" Another silence. Longer this time. "I had a feeling," he said finally. "Uncle Earl told me years ago that he had put some papers somewhere safe. He didn't tell me where. When I saw the quilts at the sale, I thought maybe. And you didn't think to call me? You didn't think to say, 'Aunt Dorothy, I think there might be something in these quilts. Did you know about that?'" His voice, when he answered, was quiet and a little ashamed. "No, ma'am, I didn't." I held the phone for a moment. "Bring me the quilt, Darren. Come to the house this week. We'll sit down together and we'll look at what's inside it together. Those papers, whatever they are, belong to the whole family. Not just you, not just me. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Darren?" "Yes." "Call first next time."
Darren came on a Thursday afternoon. Raymond drove down from Morristown to be there, which I hadn't asked him to do, but was glad about. Patricia was there. Tyler and Kayla came. And I'll give them this. They drove an hour on a workday without a single complaint. We sat around my dining room table, the good table with the leaf in, the one we use for Thanksgiving. I put out coffee and pound cake because I am a Southern woman and certain situations require pound cake. Darren set the burgundy Lone Star quilt in the center of the table. It looked the way all my old quilts look. Soft, warm, a little faded, like something that has been well-loved for a long time. Earl and I had picked out that burgundy fabric together at a bolt sale in 1994. He'd said it reminded him of the ironweed that grew along the ridge above his grandfather's old property. I cut the 4 stitches along the bottom seam, carefully, with the same small scissors. A sealed envelope, thicker than the others. Inside, 2 documents, handwritten in Earl's surveying notebook print. A 3-page summary of the 1948 transfer transaction with references to the original Claiborne County deed records and their book and page numbers. A signed, notarized statement from a woman named Elva Combs, dated 1987, attesting that she had been present when Horace Calloway signed papers he did not fully understand, that he had expressed distress afterward, and that in her opinion, the transaction was not right and never had been. Elva Combs, who was 91 when she signed that statement and had been dead for 20 years. And a handwritten note from Earl. I read it out loud. "To whoever finds this, I hope it's Dorothy, because she'll know what to do with it. These documents support the Calloway family's claim to the 40 acres on Cedar Fork Road in Claiborne County, transferred from Horace Calloway in 1948 by means that were not legal or fair. I have spent 20 years collecting what I could collect. I was never able to take it to court myself because of the cost and because Daddy asked me not to in his lifetime. Daddy is gone now. I don't know if this is enough. It might not be. But it is everything I found, and it is the truth. And the truth ought to count for something." I folded the note. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Raymond, 81 years old, reached across the table and put, "I want to leave you with something. I am 72 years old. I have buried my parents, my husband, 2 sisters, and more friends than I can count on both hands. I have had hard years and easy years, and years where I couldn't tell the difference between the two until I looked back at them. And here is what I know about the people who loved us before we knew to pay attention. They were doing things we didn't see. They were carrying things they didn't talk about, building things they didn't explain, leaving things behind for us that they had no guarantee we would ever find. Earl Calloway spent 20 years sewing the truth into quilts I had made with my own hands, in a house we had built together, for a family that didn't always know to look. I almost lost it all to a $25 yard sale.
but I didn't. Because a neighbor called. Because a young woman took pictures for her Instagram. Because an old man in Morristown had a good memory. Because strangers treated worn old quilts with gentleness when they didn't have to. Because I choose to believe some things find their way home. My grandmother Pearl's log cabin quilt is on the back of the couch right now, where it has been for 40 years, except for one very eventful week. The afternoon light is hitting it sideways, and the greens and creams are doing what old fabric does in the right light. They glow, just a little. I'm gonna make a pot of tea. And if you're somewhere today with a drawer you haven't opened in too long, or a chest you've been meaning to go through, or a box of things belonging to someone you loved who isn't here anymore, maybe go look. You never know what they were trying to tell you. They were always trying to tell us something. We just had to slow down enough to hear it.